Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. This is Tristan. He's a Corgi, and this is another episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And sorry we were late today. I just can't get warm. I was out pretty late for me last night, and I was so cold. I could not warm up. I could not sleep until like 2 in the morning because I could not get warm. I was under all these blankets. I had the heater blasting. I am not cut out for this environment, that's for darn sure, but I love where I live, so I just have to, and also, I was thinking this morning, being cold all the time is a symptom of a thyroid malfunction, and that could be a problem, and this is a big deal for many older women, because what's considered normal is actually not so normal, and many women I know either have a hypo or a hyper-functioning thyroid. And of course, the solution is medication and all this stuff, and they have to regulate it. You have to go to the doctor all the time. So sometimes it's better to just be cold. And it wasn't until I got a very hot bath this morning that I feel room temperature. So today, after all that, I really wanted to talk about a really big issue in the world of dogs and dog training. And there's been an ongoing sort of discussion about this for a few years now. And frankly, I think it needs to be something that we don't debate, that we finally learn and move on. And this is the idea of dominance in dogs. And there's a great article in this month's Whole Dog Journal. If you don't get the Whole Dog Journal, you definitely should sign up for it. And this article is by Linda Case. It's the beginning of her new book, but she is not the only person writing about this. It just happens that this article came in last week, and I thought it was really interesting. And some of the background on this is, we think dogs are wolves, so we're going to treat them like wolves. That's on a certain pet food commercial. They really emphasize that. They show running wolves in the snow, and then some kind of domesticated dog that does not look like a wolf running in the snow and saying, these are our wild ancestors, they need to eat what wolves eat. Well, that may be true, but not exactly what wolves eat, because they're domesticated and their behavior is also not the same as wolves. And what we thought was normal behavior in wolf packs is also not normal. A lot of the problems started in the 70s when I was in high school. And there was a great movie that came out called Never Cry Wolf, where one of the first wolf researchers, a guy named David Meech, it's M-E-C-H, David Mech, I don't know, I think it's Meech though, well, a famous movie because he ate a sandwich full of mice to see if a large carnivore could live on mice in the Arctic, where the wolves he was studying were living, because they seem to survive on mice and voles all winter and rarely catch a big animal. And wolves are really interesting creatures, and I actually won many national speaking awards for a speech I wrote about wolves, pleading for them to be reintroduced to Yellowstone and other places, and to stop killing them, because even in the 60s and 70s there was this wholesale slaughter of wolves, and hence we're stupid. We don't know anything about wolf behavior. We killed so many of them. We completely disrupted normal pack dynamics, and thank God they're in Yellowstone, because that is really, and thank God for the rangers there, because that is really some of the only good research we have about wolves is going on there now with the few packs that live in Yellowstone. Part of what happened with Mish, he was in the Arctic, but he was also on an island outside of Michigan, studying wolves that had gotten there in the winter, and they were a mix of packs, and they didn't get along that well because they were still working out how to be a pack. Anyway, and also due to our human preconceptions, notions, values, morals during the 70s, we decided that wolves were a very hierarchical society. Now really, in all the animal research I've done, which is quite a darn lot, chimps seem to be the only ones that are super hierarchical, and that may be a bias of the chimp researchers. I don't spend time with chimps, so I don't really know what's going on with them, but every other animal species where they have thought there was this hierarchical dominance, horses, dogs, wolves, that is not the case. Most animals that survive have to be cooperative to a greater or lesser extent in order to be able to survive, especially some of these large carnivores that live in groups. So what Linda Case talks about in her article is the relationship between wolves and dogs, looks at some of the scientific naming to show that wolves are in fact kind of cousins to dogs, not necessarily like, one day you had a wolf and it became a dog. We always think then about that fox study they did in Russia where they bred the less timid foxes of humans over and over. It only took like 3 generations for them to become calm and sweet, much like our dogs. And of course, across Europe, people now have some of those very same foxes in their homes as pets. But that is not necessarily the way that we see things changing with wolves to dogs. So the important part of this, and I may have to do several episodes on this because this is something I care deeply about and I think really changes people's opinions and how we work with dogs. There is a popular TV famous dog trainer, quote unquote, who really talks about pack dynamics and hierarchy. You need to be the leader and blah, blah, blah. Well, current research, and that's 10 years, 15 years till present, really says that is not the case at all. And in fact, wolves live in a very cooperative society. There may be a breeding pair, but if they were fighting all the time, they would be using energy. They would not be able to hunt together as a group. Imagine when you've worked in an office where people didn't get along. How much work did you guys really do in that setting? Not so much. So wolves need to be able to get along in order to survive. And I don't know how we were so dumb to think that that was not the case. But, Mish has defended his misstudy with lots of reasons why he thought that. And he has said personally, the guy's, 20 years older than I am now. He's an older guy. He has said that his greatest regret is that his crappy research, he was a grad student when this happened, has totally changed dog training for a very bad way, and that he has tremendous regrets about that, and that he just hopes he can live long enough to stop that misnomer. And thank God books like this one Linda Case has written have been coming out talking about dogs' relationships to wolves. So, this was a very popular concept all the way through the 70s and 80s and 90s, that we had to train dogs by dominance and, yell at them and be bigger than them, and the alpha role, I don't even like to talk about that. And a lot of the training that evolved during that time, and this is also a time when people like my mom were bringing their pet dogs to training classes because there were more and more dog trainers around. And a lot of those training methods emphasized really just flat out abuse, physical abuse of dogs, under the guise of training and dominating them. And, I am a physical therapist, and I can tell you, the dog there was a Corgi, sadly, a Corgi, long back Corgi, that I had to have as a neighbor for a while. And this woman, who was a psychologist who owned the dog, really bought into this dominance thing. So she was alpha rolling, quote unquote, her Corgi all the time for normal puppy behavior. And, she looked at the wrong way. And what happened to that Corgi? Tremendous back problems, lameness issues, behavior problems from this constant rolling. Dogs are not designed to be pushed over every 5 minutes when they do anything. And the dog became somewhat snarky with humans, and protective of herself with other dogs, because she was in physical pain from this person, doing what a popular trainer said to do, alpha roll your dog. And this was only 18 years ago. So that's a really bad thing to do for your dogs, and it does nothing except make them afraid of you. So that whole idea of training by punishment and negative reinforcement, just because we use psychological terms to talk about what we're doing doesn't make it okay. So that has all been disproven, ineffective, not working. And as Linda Tellington always says, if you make your animal a slave, what's going to happen on the day that that animal finally gets a taste of freedom and wants that freedom, like any of us would? It's not going to be a good situation if you have a big animal like a horse or a German Shepherd that has a lot of ability to defend himself against you. So we don't want our animals to be slaves. I mean, anybody listening to me today or later today when this gets up on Facebook, they want their animals to be their friends. And guess what? Current research has shown that this is how wolves interact and this is how dogs interact. They want to be pals. They want to be a family group. They want to be a cohesive unit. They want to be friends. Dogs' evolution is changing to match their needs and our desires and their desires to be friends with us. They want to be with us. You know, that's a fact. That is not something that you can say is not true. So what we see with wolves now with proper research is that they do have a family unit, and that they have, you know, postures and things that they do to dispel any kind of aggression or fighting. And the only thing that we've seen that looks like hierarchy is just resource guarding, which we all have seen with dogs and groups. Certainly humans, you know, little children, put them in a room with 3 less toys than the group of kids, and you'll see resource guarding of the kids who have those toys, and the other kids, the 3 that didn't get a toy, feeling left out. So resource guarding is a whole different thing than dominance. And that's when you start to see some of the behaviors that we see in bonobos, a closely related cousin to the chimp, which are a much more cooperative matriarchal society than chimps are. So you will see the bonobos sharing child rearing, and even wolves share child rearing tasks for the whole pack. And they're just a much more cooperative species. They, you know, they would share the toys. If there was a shortage of toys, they would share the toys. Humans, it depends on the person and the day. We are not as nice as a lot of other species. So it is considered obsolete and completely inaccurate now that there's this idea of hierarchy and dominance in wolf packs, and therefore our dogs, and that we need to dominate them. In fact, there's lots of evidence that supports that dogs have complex thought. There's a new book out by Stanley Coren. He wrote a book about dog intelligence, and he has another one out with a Corgi on the cover. So I have the first one. I'm going to get the second one and read it, and I'll give you a little book report. Anyway, that dogs are capable of complex thought, planning, perspective taking, and even have elements of what we call theory of mind, which is an idea of self-awareness. And they studied this a lot with some of the gorillas and chimps that they taught hand signals to. And I did this experiment with my dog Comet, where you put a sticky spot on their head and have them looking in the mirror and observe their behavior to see if they recognize that that spot is them, on them, in the mirror. And that's how they prove theory of mind. If the chimps were pulling this off, or the gorillas were pulling the sticker off and looking at it and then putting it back on, and that was considered evidence of their self-awareness. Now, I put the sticker on Comet, and he looked at me, and he looked at the thing, and he pawed his head a little bit, and I stuck it back on him, and I put it in different places, and it was very clear to me that he knew I was putting a sticker on his head, and that was him in the mirror. And I've seen Tristan. I have mirrors all over my yard, and quite a few are the size of my dog, so they're down low. He loves to go look at himself in the mirror. And even the wild rabbits I have in my yard will look at themselves in the mirror, and they'll do the right side, the left side, they'll do like little highs to the other bunnies. So yes, I know for a fact animals have theory of mind. Whether or not anyone's going to prove it in my lifetime, prove it in quotations, in some lab. If I had a PhD in something, I could be doing research for hardly any money, and maybe I could be the one to show that animals have theory of mind. Temple Grandin is a brilliant designer of scientific studies, and I'm sure if she put her mind to it, she could come up with something. And Rupert Sheldrake as well, come up with a simple test to prove this. And you know, they have to do thousands of animals for somebody to believe them, but certainly dogs are showing lots of evidence of having theory of mind, as are cats and lots of other animals. The bottom line is that dogs are not wolves. No matter how wolves behave, our dogs are evolved to be in a completely different setting than a wolf. You know, there's no competition for food. His food is delivered a couple times a day in a bowl on his plate, in his kitchen, on his placemat. And his needs are met by me, and we have a great relationship. He comes everywhere with me, and we have a great time. He's living nothing like a wolf. He doesn't have to worry about cold or food or other animals. And in fact, feral dogs don't actually act cooperatively. And occasionally they will share in the care of others' offspring, but they are very different than wolves. Wolves are much more cooperative than a group of feral dogs. Somebody smartly has said, but that's because dogs have evolved to cooperate with humans, not necessarily with each other. And certainly we've seen dogs work cooperatively. Back in the days when people used to, and Temple Grandin's written about this in one of her books, about letting the dogs out and they run in the neighborhood in a pack. And yes, we've seen dogs work cooperatively in those situations, sharing a upturned garbage can or something like that. Yeah, we don't ask much of them. They just seem to know what's right and what's wrong. That's the truth. They are so much smarter than we are if we would only pay attention to them. So dogs, what they've discovered, and actually more than a couple of researchers have pointed this out, that dogs, we don't keep them in their family groups. And it's really interesting to look at horses that are maintained in their family groups, and their behavior is very different than these poor animals that get sold, and end up in a pasture with 10 other horses they've never met. And, then there is competition and fighting and this sort of, not dominance, but definitely shuffling to see who's your friend and who's not your friend. And generally when horses are left in a group, that was one of the most interesting things about the film project I was in, was observing a bunch of horses who are 20 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old, and they're all in groups. They're all in one big group, but they're there with their offspring. None of their offspring have ever been sold or left the farm. And they've never been separated from them. And the mares just naturally sort of get a little distance between them and their babies at some point when they're pregnant again, or, whatever. And then they also develop friendships in other family groups and hang out with each other that way. So they're much different than we think. And I think dogs actually do have friends, even in feral dogs. I've seen this myself because I've been in places with lots of feral dogs. But dogs in particular, their behavior is directed towards humans. They want to get our attention. They want us to be their friends. And what they found is that dogs really have friends. And all of us who have dogs have seen, if we have 4 dogs, there are a couple that want to hang out together, and they're their friends. My sister's got one dog who's in love with this cat, and the cat and the dog are clearly friends. I mean, there's 10 other dogs to pick from and 5 other cats, but this one dog and cat are pals. And we've seen that in her group too, with certain dogs that are pals with each other and other dogs that are not. Tristan loves his girlfriend Coco. And it's so funny. They're so happy to see each other. But then as soon as they're together, it's like, oh, we've always been together and we're just going to hang out. And, whatever you find to smell that looks good, I'm going to smell it too. And, when either of them go to the bathroom, the other one is very intrigued. And of course, we walk the same route, not always together. And so there's all these days when we have the smells of our buddies. And clearly, they are good friends. They really like each other. They're the same age. They're the same size. And I really like Coco's mom, too. So it's a good thing for all of us. So dogs are certainly capable of having friends and choose to have friends. And they are very different from wolves in that they are really attuned to our facial expressions, our breathing, our posture. They watch us so closely, just like that famous horse, Clever Hans, who supposedly did math. He was so smart. He was able to observe shifts in his person's posture and behavior when he knew he was counting out the answer to a math problem with his hoof. As he got closer to the answer, he'd be like, tap, tap, tap. The person would be like, oh, I hope he stops at 25. Tap, tap. And then he'd stop, and the person would be like, shoo. And the horse was observing all these subtle things. I mean, the guys were purposely trying not to give the horse any clues, but in fact, the horse was showing signs of an ability to do math, but actually he was showing super duper, what they call now emotional intelligence, by being able to cue into that person. Dogs are, like horses, even better at watching our facial expressions and our communication signals, the tone of our voice, and they want to cooperate with us way more than wolves do, of course. But, I have a friend who spent a lot of time with some rescued wolves in Indiana, where they have a wolf park. And, those wolves are so used to being around humans. They're loose with you, and they're well fed, so they don't want to eat you, and wolves don't really want to eat us anyway. But they are starting to understand human eye signals, like where you look and things. They really cue into that. So it's not too far off from wolves, what dogs are doing, but part of that is there need to be a pack. There need to be a cooperative group. They need to be tuned in to every signal from their pals so that they can hunt without getting killed. When you are a small critter like a wolf trying to take down something as big as a moose or a caribou or an elk or a buffalo, oh my God, you need to be a well-oiled machine. That group of 5 or 6 or 4 or even 3 wolves needs to be so perfectly cued into each other that they can hunt successfully without getting injured, because the loss of a pack of like 4, the loss of one wolf will really impact the ability of them to take down big game. So they have to be really great at reading these small signals, and dogs have learned to do that with us. And they don't live in a constant state of dominance behavior against other dogs in the house or against you or your children or your husband. You know, that's just a myth and a big mistake in somebody's research years ago. So in fact, dogs are cooperative, they like us, and we are lucky they choose to spend time with us, because honestly, I think, as many of you do, there are plenty of times and people that are not worthy of the presence of a dog, because these are little angels and they have so much to give us, and we don't give them enough credit for their intelligence and their wisdom and their many brilliant gifts. So dogs are not wolves, and there is no such thing as dominance in the dog world or the wolf world. There might be some resource guarding, like any little 3-year-old who doesn't want to share his toys. And maybe that's because you're hungry. After all, wolves have to really fight for their food on a daily basis, unlike our little guys here. And, you know, there's a whole other question about whether dogs exhibit jealousy of other dogs in the house, and that's another whole question for another day. So thanks for joining us today for this episode of Conversation with a Corgi, where we have looked at some of the new, well, not new, becoming more popular research and ideas regarding the ancestor of the dog, the wolf, and the dog and dog's behavior. No such thing as dominance in the world of the dog, contrary to popularized TV shows, etc. And the same goes for horses. Horses, there's so much going on with the horse world with this dominance idea, with the boss mare and equine assisted therapy, and oh my gosh, that's another like 5 days of talk, which I don't know if I'll do, but I can think about it. Okay, so everybody have a great day. It's another great day here. I'm going off to see a horse this morning who has a classic problem for a craniosacral therapist. His sacrum, the SI joint, the sacrum and the ilium were separated in a bad fall a year ago, and so they finally found me, and I'm going to go see this horse today and do some weeding. Because the yard is so moist. I might be able to get a start on my gardens for next year to have fewer weeds. What are you going to do today, Tris? Going to eat some treats? Going to have a long walk? Maybe a brush up, because you're pretty hairy right now. And you still smell so beautiful from your bath. Oh, and another important thing about animals, which we might talk about tomorrow, is the idea that animals can teach other animals things. And certainly we've seen that in T-Touch. Horses watch other horses when they're working in the ring, and then we bring in the new horses, and they know exactly what's going on, and they're all ready to do it. And one of the greatest examples right now is to go to Karen Tyndall, CarynTindal. Go to her page on Facebook, and she has a pretty recent, like yesterday, video of her little baby Wilbur, who's like 4 months old, something like that, little baby Corgi, and her border collie who's 3. And the little guy has learned many tricks from watching his sister border collie do them, and she's so enthusiastic when she does them. What little guy would not want to do what she's doing? So it's so adorable to see him copying her and learning from her. So check that out. All right, we'll see you later. Have a good day.